All right, I'm going to call the February 18th, 2020 meeting, the Select Board meeting to order. So first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Someone will stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, so there's no announcements this evening. Is anyone here for public comment? No public comment. Okay, so we're going to move to the regular schedule. So Representative Meridian will provide a legislative update. Representative Meridian, nice to see you.
Nice to
Thank
see
you.
Thank you for allowing me a couple minutes of time tonight. I just wanted to come in, obviously, like I've been doing pretty much every other month or so, and just give you a little update about what we're doing on Beacon Hill. Right now, in February, I've already reached out to all of the town managers' offices to try and get a decent idea of what we're going to be looking forward to for earmarks that we can hopefully fight for in the upcoming budget. I know Senator Moore has already done that as well. So then we'll work together to try to secure everything we can, aside and above from increases in Chapter 70 and things like that. So our budget comes out the second week in April, and we have about 2 days to go through the whole budget and try to figure out where we need to try to file amendments, what we're trying to look at, things like that. Then we basically have all of school vacation week to go through the amendments. Is typically about 1,200 amendments filed. So you go through those, you try to figure out which ones you want to support, which ones you maybe don't want to support, and then we go in the last week in April and we do our budget. Senate pretty much has the same steps, but that's in May. And then if there are any differences language-wise, number-wise, between the House version and the Senate version, then it goes to a conference committee, and they hash out the differences, and then we vote on the final conference committee budget. So hopefully we're a little bit more, hopefully we're done in a timely manner this go-around. Last year, we ended up being the last state in the country. So that was a bit difficult, where we couldn't get an agreement between 6 members on the conference committee to come out with a budget. So that was pretty frustrating on our end, but we'll try to get it done a bit quicker this time. A couple other things I wanted to let you know about. We passed what's called Znicki's Law. So that was signed on February 13th, 2020. And basically what that does is establishes an abuse registry through the Disabled Persons Protection Commission. So what you do then is anyone who's working with individuals with intellectual and or developmental disabilities will now be entered into that database. So you want to make sure that you have good people working with good people. And then the last thing that I wanted to just kind of touch on, which is starting to go live this upcoming Sunday, is the hands-free legislation. So that was long overdue. Finally, we got to an agreement, a consensus on it. So just so you know, Massachusetts already bans texting while driving, and for individuals who are 18 and under, they can't use any form of a handheld device. That will be extended to all adults moving forward. Basically, you have to use something like a Bluetooth earpiece or speaker. You can use a speakerphone, Apple Watch, things like that, but anything that it allows you to still continue to have 2 hands on the wheel at all times. You can use it. There's a little exemption where you can use it for like a 1 swipe if you need to start the Siri on your phone or anything like that. You can still use Google Maps. You can still use Waze, but you have to set that up before you start driving. So that goes, like I said, goes into effect this Sunday. Now, basically throughout March, all police departments are going to be issuing warnings as they try to make sure that they keep us safe, and we try to learn the new rules while driving. So the first offense is $100. The second offense is $250, and third and subsequent offenses after that are $500. And after the second offense, you have to take a driving course as well. So hopefully this makes our roads safer. I know when I drive to Boston, I see people doing all sorts of things in the cars, and driving and paying attention isn't necessarily one of them. But with that being said, happy to answer any questions you might have. Happy to sit in front of this board and let you know that recently I did go and pull papers, and I am excited to run for re-election. I'm looking forward to the campaign season and being your voice for at least 2 more years. So thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion from the board?
I have a couple questions. So Dave, first of all, thank you very much for your advocacy on behalf of Grafton. As the town administrator pointed out, I think it was last week or maybe a couple weeks ago, you and Mike do a good job of bringing home some money for us for capital projects and money for roads and streets, and we really do appreciate that. However, a question for you about bills for spending and bills for revenue, and forgive my ignorance, I tried to Google this the other day and I couldn't find anything good, but do spending bills strictly originate in the House?
Yep.
Okay. What about bills for generating revenue?
Those, I think, could be from either branch.
Okay.
Yeah, I would imagine they would be. I mean, with all the different proposals that are floated out there, ultimately a revenue driver would probably come from either side.
Okay. Is there anything that the House is considering that would generate revenue for municipalities that is likely to pass this year?
There's a transportation bond bill that's being bantered about. That's something that we've been talking about for a long time, which, we have the opportunity to hopefully put something in. But understand that bond bills are somewhat funny money, where there's 160 members in the House who want to put in a project, 40 members in the Senate that put in that, their project. And then if it's all included, they only end up bonding out a certain amount of dollars. So it's very difficult to get them. I know some of my colleagues, if they do secure bonded money, would kind of run and do press releases, and we've secured bonded money before, but I haven't done that because I don't think that you should be doing that until you actually have it. But that's one of the big bills coming up. We obviously have the budget, like I had said, and remains to be seen kind of how our revenue is looking, how our benchmarks are looking, and they're looking good. As of right now, anything can happen tomorrow, but we're looking all right. So I think the budget will be a pretty favorable one.
Okay.
And I'm certainly looking forward to pushing, like I said, for more Chapter 70.
And the state budget, state income, I think was up this year, was it not? Mm-hmm. Okay. Obviously we have a very well-founded concern about municipal receipts, not just Chapter 78, but unrestricted local aid in general. I've said this before, and I always have to apologize to you for this. You're our state rep, so complaints go up and not down,
Yep.
right? But government aid, state aid to municipalities, for us at least, used to be about 5% higher as a percentage of our budget. So every year since 2002, we've asked the taxpayers to throw more and more in for local property taxes, which are regressive, and less has come from the state. We're paying out a ton for neighboring municipalities, but getting a little bit less in return every year. And it's become difficult to come up with that extra money. So 3%, the 5% difference between where we used to be in our budget and where we are now is about $3.5 million. And we're having we're having a difficult conversation in this community about which services might need to be cut and about which taxpayers are going to pay more, and is that fair? And I can't help but note we wouldn't be having that conversation if we had that extra $3.5 million from the state. Okay. And I was just wondering, the Boston Globe actually named Grafton as one of the communities that would see the least amount of benefit from the Education Opportunity Act, and I was wondering if you had read that and what your reaction was to that.
Yeah, I read it as soon as it did come out. The story to me was right but wrong because it included the numbers, but it didn't include all the numbers. It didn't talk about special education, transportation reimbursement, which for a community like ours, that's where we're going to see the benefits. You might not see it on the bottom line for Chapter 70. And trust me, I went back and forth on this because I was almost, I was really close to voting against the bill, and I would have been the only legislator to vote against the Student Opportunity Act. And I just didn't think it went far enough to help out communities like ours.
Okay.
If you look at it, there are inner cities that are going to get 130 million over 7 years with the bill that just went through. That does nothing for us. The big caveat for me was the special education reimbursement side of it, which the Globe article didn't reference. So that's kind of where we'll get some benefit. I went back and forth with Jay Cummings on it. I actually sat in with Dan. I sat with all three of my town superintendents. I sat with members from the school department to try to get their grasp on it all before we voted on it. And it's something that I'll continue to push because I don't think that $30 per pupil is acceptable, to be honest with you.
Okay. And I've asked you this before. I guess I'll ask again. Do we still have a spending problem, or do we have a revenue problem in Massachusetts?
You could probably make the case of both.
Okay.
I mean, we have a budget that's growing by $600-800 million a year. There are different spots in the budget that any legislator can point to that they would want to target to try to get some savings. One of my colleagues, and I think I've mentioned it to you before, one of my colleagues who was very outspoken on the issue, he's no longer in the House of Representatives, but his big thing, and this is just his, was looking at dollars that go to undocumented individuals, upwards of $2 billion a year in the Commonwealth.
Right, but I read that study, and that study came from, I think it was an institute, it was one of those right-leaning institutes, and the Cato Institute actually came out, that not exactly a bastion of left liberal thinking, and said that report had been thoroughly debunked. What I would hope to do, Dave, is work with your office over the course of this coming year. I think this board should. I think this board should come up with some legislative priorities that would further income to municipalities, because we have a very thoroughly middle class community, and the people in our community, as you well know, because you're everywhere all at once, and so I know you're talking to people all the time. Our constituents have concerns about, education, medical bills, aging in place, roadways, safety, just being able to save for college, being able to save for retirement. We have a community whose families are on the edge of all sorts of financial ruin at any given time. And even little things like asking them for an additional $300 to $500 a year in property taxes is going to set off a tremendous debate in this town. So we owe it to them to think of, what can we do better? And what's the most fair way to go about asking everybody to contribute to all the things that we say we want? And it occurs to me all the time that, the state level is really where you can affect major change, and really, I think, make things a little bit more equitable for people, because, I can't help but notice Boston is going to be a tremendous recipient of the Education Opportunity Act, but you walk around the seaport and there are condos going for $5 million. And they've never passed an override. How is that fair? And we're in our second in 5 years. You know what I mean? So there are conversations that I feel like that don't happen on Beacon Hill, but happen in the hallways of municipal centers just like this, and in communities next door to us and around this area, filled with, smaller towns that don't have any political weight, but together I feel like there should be a larger conversation if we could just harness those voices,
Yeah, and I would say let's not sell our town short. I don't think that we don't carry any political weight. I think having a very active body of electeds from Worcester County, both Republicans and Democrats, both very conservative and very liberal, both men and women, we're all trying to fight for the same thing. Having a lieutenant governor right next door certainly helps out in things we've been able to do. Bringing Secretary Ash out when he was the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development to see Route 30 so that we could keep it in his mind when we were able to get the MassWorks grant for over $500,000. That's the sort of stuff that's going on where those conversations are in the chamber in Beacon Hill or in the hallways of Beacon Hill, not just the hallways of municipal centers, but there's always so much more than, just the main ones, the Chapter 70, Chapter 90, things like that. But listen, as I've always said when I've come before this board, I want to work with you. Whenever the town applies for a grant, and I know that you all sit on many committees with, wear different hats. Whenever we apply for a grant, please let me know. Because they're very competitive, as you are pointing out right now, with how competitive the dollars are to get. If I can lend my voice to it early and often, I think that puts us in a better spot than if you're trying to come in the last minute.
Yeah, I agree with you. And speaking of that timing, when would be, I'd imagine this is not a great time of year to start tossing back and forth ideas about revenue generation, because you guys are already talking about amendments that are going to be voted on, and those are going to need political support. But would you say, like, if we approached you in the summertime and said, let's toss some ideas back and forth about, potential legislation that we could bring to you or work with you on to present to your fellow members, would the summertime be a better time for that, or?
So in the second year of our session, at the end of July, we break out of full formal. So when there's a recorded roll call vote, and that's throughout the end of the calendar year. So any bill that would require roll call, like that would be very, very difficult to have it fast tracked, save if you filed it tomorrow and get it done by the end of July. However, come the beginning of a legislative cycle, there's like a 2 or 3 week window where any bill that gets filed is considered filed in a timely manner. So you're guaranteed a public hearing.
Oh, great.
So right now, if we filed a bill, a late file, you're not even guaranteed to get out of the Rules Committee.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have a good relationship with the committee chair, so we've been able to get local bills out before. But that's something that, and I know that Tim's actually reached out to me
Yeah.
on some of these issues already. He's being very proactive with it, and it's something I want to continue the conversation with. I don't know if it's something that we want to look at as maybe a home rule petition,
Sure.
which might be the way to go. We'll get the approval if that's what the town ends up voting for, and then those are a little bit easier to usher through the legislative process. But it's just something to keep in mind. This is a very big conversation that we can certainly continue to have.
Yeah, but I think it's time that we have it too. You know what I mean? Because we're in a place now where I'm afraid that unless something changes, we're just going to be in the cycle of asking people for more regressive income tax raises on their property, and we'd like to break out of that if we could.
Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Yes, Peter.
Dave, thank you for coming in today. Appreciate that and the update and answering our questions. In terms of grants, could your office help us out by any chance in maybe any grants that you or your office or staffers have come across that you think Grafton should be considering? Is that something you can send to us? That way we can direct and say, hey, we really think this is a worthwhile grant. We really like to see what the feasibility is for Grafton to file for these things.
Without a doubt, whenever anything comes across our desk, we do. I can think of one offhand, and I don't want to get into the murky details of what it was, but I know that some of my communities did apply, some did not, and I try to make sure that everyone does. So with that, we'll certainly continue to scour all of the different, secretariats and see what they have. But I think the best course of action would be all of our department heads who know what they're looking at. It's difficult for us every day
Right.
to kind of search the Executive Office of Public Safety and Homeland Security and all the different agencies that fall under that, and then environment and, things of that nature, and going all the way down. Whereas if we have our DPW, and I know they do a great job, if we have our DPW know what they're looking for, and then they start the process of applying, then it's easy to roll with it that way. But yeah, well, anytime we send them right over.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Well, thank you,
Thanks, Dave.
Representative.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Leanne, thank you. All right, so,
Good to see you again.
Thanks for coming in.
thank you, Dave. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, next on the agenda is a one-day beer and wine license from Tufts Vet School for Team Dynamic Workshop on March 2nd, 2020. Is anyone here from Tufts? Do you want to come up for a moment? Do you have anything to say? Do you want to? No? Okay.
I'm good.
All right. So I'll
Madam Chair.
take a motion. Yes.
Move the board vote to grant Tufts Vet School a one-day beer and wine license for Team Dynamic Workshop being held on March 2nd, 2020.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda, vote to allow chair to sign contract with LED installers. So Becca, do you want to give us a little background on this?
Sure. So this is part of the Green Communities Project and switching over all the streetlights to LED. This particular part of the project was bid out with the Massachusetts Metropolitan Area Planning Committee, who we've had on board with us since we embarked on the transition, the LED transition. They're providing us with a small grant for administration to do some of the bidding. So they bid out the install for the lights with another community, Saugus, who's also doing green communities at the same time as us. We received the bids back. They were on par with what we were estimating for installation based on the initial walkthrough of lights that was done by Tanko, who's our consultant on the project. Total cost for installation is $59,261. I don't have the contract for the board this evening. It's unfortunately still being drafted by MAPC, and we have a call tomorrow with Saugus to go over references for the winning bidder. So the board can either, whatever it chooses, we can pass over this until March 3rd and bring it back to you then. It won't affect timeline. Or if you're comfortable, you can vote to allow the chair to sign, and Ginny is currently reviewing the contract, so we can do that as well, whatever the board would prefer.
So the contract is with MAPC,
The contract
right?
is with Daigle
Okay.
Electric.
Okay,
My apologies, I don't think I mentioned that.
Okay.
But they were the lowest bidder. They do appear to be the lowest responsible bidder. Like I said, we're just waiting to have that reference check call tomorrow. So we can definitely table this until March 3rd. It won't back anything up, timeline-wise.
okay.
Madam Chair.
Mr. President.
I'm sorry, I would never advise anybody to sign a contract without reading it. So I just move that we table this until March 3rd.
Anyone else?
I'm fine with that.
All right, yeah.
That's
Why
fine.
don't we table the
Yeah.
discussion? All right, thank you. So moving on to, we have no resignations, appointments, vote to appoint election workers. I'll take a motion.
Madam Chair, move the
Mr.
board vote
Carlson.
to affirm the town administrator's appointment of Christine, I'm sorry, wrong motion. I move the board vote to recommend the appointment of the following individuals, election workers for the town of Grafton: Melissa Goddard and Zoe Ann Rasmussen.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And then we have, I'll take a motion for Recreation Commission.
Madam Chair, I move the board vote to affirm the town administrator's appointment of Christine Bishop to the Recreation Commission for a term to expire on June 30th, 2020.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Chris, thank you for volunteering. All right, so next on the agenda is nomination of Select Board member to the Grafton Public Library's Long Range Planning Committee. The board received, I think it was in our packet, but we also received it in email form from Beth regarding starting a public library long-range planning committee. But Becca, if you want to just, for the public's sake, maybe
Yeah,
go into
sure.
a little
So-
bit of detail.
This is a project that the library trustees and Beth has undergone before. 5 years ago, they developed a long-range plan, which currently is set to expire December 2020. The long-range plan is required for, by the MBLC for communities who are interested in applying for and receiving grants, and seeing as how we are applying for and hoping will receive a very large grant from the library for the new building, we do definitely need to start this process now. So it's not required that a member of the board be on the committee, but Beth, wanted to reach out and give you the opportunity, and she would like for a member of the select board to be involved in that process. In the email, I think she specified, but two meetings, working groups to go through, what the goals are long-term, and then ultimately bring forth a plan that the trustees can approve for the next 5 years.
Great. Any discussion on this?
Madam Chair,
Ms. Stock?
I'd be interested in serving on this. I just offered to serve on the
Yeah.
building committee and actually on the Commission for Disabilities. There's also a library component to that, and I volunteered for that one. So I think I'd like to keep them all focused.
Great. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
What's the motion? What are we moving?
I move that we appoint Donna to the thing that she just volunteered for. Madam Chair, I move that we appoint Donna Stock to the Grafton Public Library's Long Range Planning Committee.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I will say, if we have a March 10th meeting, I don't know if we do have one scheduled right now, but this would conflict with, they only have two meetings, one March 10th and one May 12th, so, if that's
Okay.
okay with them.
Okay.
I mean,
you know,
It's a workshop day. It's the
Yeah.
second Tuesday of the month. So, I mean, we probably will meet. It's on the schedule now. So
okay.
it's something to consider.
Okay. So what do we do? We'll just reach out to her and see if maybe someone else can go in place.
Whatever.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second. No discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Donna.
Motion carries. Thank you, Donna. All right, next on the agenda, vote to support an override for FY 2021. So, we've had obviously a lot of budget discussions in the past few weeks, and as we know, the statute requires a number for us to put this question on a ballot, but for the community's benefit and feedback and discussions we've been having thus far, we're discussing tonight a motion for the TA and I would even say maybe the school committee to make a number recommendation to present to our TRICON meeting on 3/5 so that we can, have a discussion and have a number and a date and a, be presented with a ballot question for that day. But I'm opening it up to the board for further discussion or a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Madam Chair,
Mr. Prisco.
which we can, I guess, then discuss. I move that this board vote to direct the town administrator to work with the school department to draft a suggested number to be presented to the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board at the TRICOM meeting on, I think it's March 5th,
Yes, March 5th.
on March 5th.
Okay.
Second?
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, so,
Mr. Carlson.
this is to establish a second budget, correct? Essentially
Right.
establishing the immediate need for FY 20 as not the original balanced budget, but this would be another budget based on the requests. And so essentially what we're asking Tim and the school department to do is make adjustments to their numbers, present that March 5th at the TRICOM committee meeting,
Yes.
which we would ultimately have a discussion and make a decision one way or the other. The, so just on the logistics of that, is there anything in addition that you need to have done prior to that March 5th date that we set at the last meeting?
I guess my answer to that is I don't think so. My recollection of the last time we did this was there was a number and the Board of Selectmen took a vote to put that particular number on the ballot. Then there was more discussion about the number, and I think that number had to be revised before we got to putting it on the warrant. And then there was a ballot that came out after the warrant was drafted in June. So at town meeting in 2014, we passed the budget without the override, which was contingent upon the override either passing or failing. If the override passed, we would then go with that budget, and if the override failed, we would not. That's my recollection of it. So I think as we sit here today, we would be okay if we got to the TRICOM meeting and had a number or came up with a number at the TRICOM meeting that we thought was sufficient, took a vote then to put that number on the warrant and proceeded from there. What I don't want to do is get to TRICOM meeting and have, 30 people all staring at each other again. I think we need to move past that phase.
Madam Chair?
Ms. Stock?
Just a little clarification. I don't think we're asking for the town administrator and the superintendent to come back with a whole new budget. I think we're asking them to come to some consensus about what the number is and what the purpose is for us to communicate to the townspeople on what we're voting whether it's just for the schools, whether there's something else that's included, whether or not it's some of the items that were presented by Tim at one of our previous meetings or not. But, I mean, we have the budgets, and we know what the school needs are, and I think that's what we're trying to accomplish.
That's my understanding too, is that we would talk about, the budgets have been presented, you know, obviously at the TRICOM meeting, we'll have further discussion on the budget, but specifically as far as in terms of this override discussion, having the town administrator, the school department, and the superintendent work together to come up with, this is what we propose and are asking for the board to vote on for an override. And this is the language, this is the timeline that we want it, and we can have discussions at that meeting on that, come to a consensus on what we agree or disagree on, and vote at that meeting. So then the public has a number, a date, and an answer of whether or not we're putting that on the budget.
Sure. I mean, it might be half a dozen one thing, six of another, because I think if you're asking to focus on the school department, if you're asking Jay to come up with a figure that he needs to fund his department, he's probably going to have the FY21 budget in mind that would further that figure, and then a projection from there
Right.
about what he would need going forward. So, you know, I'm sure when we walked into the room, they would be able to answer any questions that we have both on where the figure came from and, you know, how that would impact his budget next year.
And I think that's why the TRICOM meeting is the right place to have this
Right,
too. You know,
right.
we're gonna have all those people in the room, we can have these discussions, not just with the board, but with FinCom and the school committee right there. Any other discussion from the board? Peter?
I just want to go back on your point, Donna. The budget that I have is the one that Tim submitted to me, which is balanced with next year's figures. I don't have a budget from Tim. I know the figures are out there and I know that, but I do not have that budget. So to me right now, the town administrator's role and responsibility is to submit a balanced budget. So right now I have an ask from one department that doesn't align with Tim's recommendation with the funding that he has going into FY21, right? So I would ask if you have a copy of that budget, or if someone can maybe explain that to me. I only have one budget, guys. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's what it is,
we all have
and
one
I
budget.
think, yeah, we all have the budget, and we know what's being proposed, and the school department is saying they need more, and that's what the intent of the override is to provide them more, or combine it with other needs where we have made some cuts as well to balance our budget, and put those forward along with the school budget.
Is that clear to Tim?
Yeah, I understand what this board is asking.
Okay.
So I'll just recap to make sure we're on the same page. So we will take, you know, the information that we presented in mid-January, which was the initial 6.5 number, right? That had a lot of stuff in it, including the school's number. We're gonna have to rework that number a little bit because that was before we found out about health insurance. So Jay's number is gonna look a little different for FY21, and our number is also gonna look a little different. So I don't know if it's still 6.5. I don't know, but that's what we're gonna find out between now and March 5th. We're gonna get the number, we're gonna tell you what's included in the number and a justification for those numbers, and then we'll tell you what it costs. And then you guys talk about what parts of it you wanna do, or all of it, or.
Okay.
So that's, and to your point, Peter, eventually there will be two budgets, because if we get down the road and the board decides to do the override, then we move into, you have the contingency budget, and then you have the proposed budget, and you have to base, you know, your proposed budget, your contingency is based on whether or not the override passes. So it'll be a very similar process
Right.
to what we did in 14.
Okay.
Right.
So if I'm understanding right, then I think we're good. We
Do
can-
you satisfy my curiosity with one question?
Yeah.
Is it still possible for us to even have a vote on an override before town meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
If
There's
we
still,
did that, then it would obviate the need for a second budget come town meeting.
oh, you mean do a ballot
Yeah.
prior
ballot vote,
to
right.
town meeting?
Right.
Yeah, you need 45 days. The clerk's office will tell you that the longer you can give her, the better, because
Yeah.
it's a ballot and it takes time and you have to print them and there's costs associated with that.
So by the time
Timeline-
we get to March 5th,
timeline
it's
is
gonna be-
really tight.
Yeah, that's probably too tight. Okay.
But, you know, realistically, you're probably looking at a very similar scenario to what we saw
Yeah, in 2014.
in 14.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Thank you.
Thank you. And so I just want to clarify again, I think it's important to also propose a timeline too. The
So
discussion
that'll
between-
definitely be part of
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
conversation
yeah,
on the fifth
on
as
the
well,
5th,
which
right.
the school department, I'm sure that they have, I know Jay has a lot of internal timelines in terms of, making a decision on the
Right.
budget impacts what he does for the upcoming
Yeah.
year, so that will definitely be part of the conversation on the fifth.
The,
Madam Chair.
Yep.
I mean, just for my calculations here, it could be done on April 21st, but that's right in the middle of April vacation, so then it would be the 28th if we're doing a Tuesday or that week, so we do have
Okay.
time.
okay. Good. Thank you. And any discussion from the public? Ray, come on up.
Ray Mead, Brigham Hill Road. I am not a fan of overrides. Not at all. But most of the cities, some of the cities and most of the towns in Massachusetts are in this situation where your revenue comes from taxes and your increases comes from new growth. If you build houses, you get new growth, but it ends up costing more in the long run. Unfortunately, Grafton doesn't have a lot of new growth. I mean, we do have a lot of new growth now, but it comes and goes and it, ebbs and flows. I had spoken to you guys before, and I had spoken to the representative and senator about revising Proposition 2.5 and creating a Proposition 3.5, Proposition 4.5. We are actually past that point now. If we're talking about a $6.5 million override, Proposition 8.5 wouldn't work right now because we need this enormous amount of money. Now, I know the schools need the money. I look back there, I don't know if there's anybody here from the schools, but I don't know why I did that. But the schools need money, and we have one important thing, and all you guys know what committee I'm on. And it is very, very important that the plan for the Fire Study Committee goes through 100%. Not a little piece right here, and a little piece right here, and a little piece right here. The entire thing has to go through. That, unfortunately, will require something that I hate, an override. So if we're looking at $6.5 million, I don't know what the actual number is, for the school department, to fund the fire department up to the plan of the Fire Study Committee, which would be 3 full-time positions, would require about $480,000. And you're done. $480,000, you're done. It's not going to continue to grow and do things like that unless somebody puts a full-time fire department in, which is not something that the committee is recommending, nor would we be looking for a command staff that would even look for that also. So when we're talking about an override of $6.5 million, I would really like the board to look at adding $480,000 to that to fully fund the Fire Study Committee's recommendation to our unanimous recommendation, the board's unanimous recommendation to fund the fire department, to bring in a management staff to fully fund the fire department. So as much as I hate overrides, I understand that the schools need it. I understand that the fire departments need it. The fire department needs it. And Proposition 2.5 is pretty much going to stay the way it is. So we're going to continue to override Proposition 2.5, which actually costs us more in the long run, every 2 to 3 years. So that's my spiel.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. When I was campaigning, one of the issues, I was trying to find out what the hot button issues were in town, and fire was one of those. And I know there's a need in this community to go from our on-call personnel to full-time. I think we've been very fortunate in this town, and we are one of the last few communities in the state that still has the on-call. I've read that full report. I agree with you 100%. I know that Peter is advocating for it as well. And I think it may be to an advantage for us to include that in an override, because as I said, the last time we had roads included in that, addressed some of the concerns that townspeople that didn't have school children were able to understand that they were going to benefit from the combination of those two in one override. So I would fully support that. And hope that we can include that 480,000 in whatever recommendation that we make.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any more discussion? All right, I have a motion and a second on the floor. So,
Can we just
we're re-
reread the motion?
yes, that'd be great.
Ed, could you reread your motion, please?
Yeah, sure, I didn't write it down, but I'm trying to remember what it said.
Tried to, but it went up. That was
Move that the board vote to direct the town administrator to work with the school department to determine a number for a recommended override by our March 5th, 2020 tri-committee meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Wait. Discussion.
Oh, any discussion? Any more discussion?
Could you add other departments?
And any other departments necessary.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, select board reports. Anyone have any reports?
Are we doing the handbook?
That's under
Oh.
discussion.
Mine here, it has it next.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
I don't have any.
Okay.
I do.
Donna?
The Commission on Disabilities met last week. We've been working off of the master plan that looked at all of the town departments except for the school department over the course of a period of time with a consultant, and put together a fairly comprehensive report of where we should be compliant within our community, and made recommendations, and we've been evaluating those. And it is a very large, comprehensive report, and we found that it was taking us a lot of time to go through it on a page-by-page basis. So we actually had a workshop last week in addition to our regular meeting, and decided to divide and conquer. So we each took various departments that we would interact with, and then bring the information back to the full committee, and then try to break it down that way. So same thing I mentioned a little while ago, I'm on the library component of that, and also because of my interest in public safety, I'm also working with the fire department and the police department to work on the recommendations that that they have. And some of these are opportunities for grants. We had one earlier this year that was not approved. But the money was allocated in the budget to address that concern. And these run from the Recreation Commission in terms of playgrounds and other things. And as I said, the school department is one that's a major component of this, which we do not have that comprehensive report. Someone on the committee is working with the school department, though. And same thing, there may be some policy recommendations, but all we are is a recommendation, to provide recommendations to this board for further action. So it was a
Great.
good meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Ed, do you have anything?
I don't. We were going to have a GSC meeting last Thursday, but in my infinite brilliance, I forgot to post the agenda, so we didn't do that.
Okay.
So that will be the 27th. I apologize.
Okay.
When's the next one?
27th.
All right, so TA reports.
Just a couple
Becca?
quick things.
Sure.
So we had a second walkthrough for the 8 Pine Street bid that's out on the street right now to develop that parcel. We had a much better showing than we had the first time around, which is great. It means that the word is getting out. Had about 20 people show up to walk through that property again, and we're getting really good feedback. Proposals are due back mid-March, so very soon we're gonna know, what the highest and best use for that parcel is, which means very good things for all of us.
Great.
Comprehensive permit for Prentice Place was approved last week by the Zoning Board of Appeals. That's the 40B project on 140 by Nelson Park. So the next step is now that the Housing Appeals Court has to actually sign off on that new permit. So probably that ball won't get rolling for a few months because things take a little bit of time there. But that's great that permit did get approved. Tomorrow night, Chris McGoldrick, the new planner, and I are going to the Central Mass Metropolitan Planning meeting in Worcester to give that the CMMPO board an update on the Main Street TIP project. So Greg Russell, who's with VHB, our consultant, will be attending with us, and they basically just ask that we come in every few months and give an update on the project, where we are, changes in design. We do have a few updates for them in terms of we've engaged the appraisers. We've started receiving certificates of donations for several easements along that route, which is very good. And we just need to hear from them that we are still on the same timeline that we have been, and as far as we know, nothing's changed. So I'll definitely follow up with the board after that meeting. We have launched the Super Park survey on the Recreation Department webpage. It's on the Facebook page and the Rec Department page and town webpage. We're asking residents to take the survey ahead of a couple of outreach meetings that are scheduled coming up, just to get feedback about what they'd like to see in the park, different aspects of the park that they're interested in, age ranges, things like that. I do also really encourage people to read the FAQ page, the FAQ page that's attached to that survey on the Recreation Department. I know there's a lot of discussion about the funding for the super park and the history of the super park. There's a lot of really good information on that webpage about funding and about the history. If people could just take a few minutes to read it, and then absolutely, if there are follow-up questions, we are happy to answer them. But it's a really great resource with a lot of really good information. Jen Anderson did a phenomenal job putting that page together. So just want to get the word out to people. If you're concerned about Super Park or you want to learn more, please do go read up. And that is, I think all I have. Yes, that's all I have tonight.
All right, thank you, Becca. Any discussion on TA reports? No? All right, moving on to correspondence. Mr.
Madam
Carlson.
Chair, we received correspondence from the Chair of the Finance Committee, and please bear with me, I'm just going to read the letter. I'm sure all of us have had a chance to read it, but for those of you who are listening out there, bear with me. Finance Committee met with the Town Administrator on Wednesday, February 12th. In that meeting, we performed an initial review of the proposed FY21 budget. The committee recognizes that our town administrator and our assistant have put significant thought and effort into the proposed budget, and we deeply appreciate their participation in our workshop. However, based on the information presented at that meeting, Finance Committee has significant concerns about the proposed budget. We respectfully ask that these concerns be addressed by the Select Board working with the town administrator, specifically the federal SAFER or SAFER grant and local marijuana tax revenues are unrealistic. Revenue assumptions should always be conservative in the budget presented at town meeting. We had a robust workshop with a lengthy discussion on these topics, but the two sources of revenue were not sufficiently justified in our meeting. When asked about cannabis, the town administrator said there's a reasonable chance that we would collect some, but not all of the anticipated revenue. We feel comfortable that we would collect $60,000 from the community host agreement. Cannabis projects are cannabis projects are in very early stage of development, and there is a history of significant delays of cannabis projects in Grafton. FinCom does not have confidence in $300,000 revenue from the 3% tax on cannabis sales due to reliance on both local development and the state approval. When asked about the reason for confidence in the SAFER grant, we were informed that we had not yet applied, did not know how much the grant would be for, and we would be applying for more than was in the budget. We were also told that the company that performed the fire study was writing the grant for us, and it was more likely that Grafton would be awarded the grant money because of its call fire department. This commentary did not sufficiently address our concerns. This is a federal grant with many applicants, with unknown funding, unknown award acceptance criteria, and unknown timelines. Finance Committee advises the Select Board to direct the town administrator to reduce revenue in the proposed budget by $300,000 for cannabis sales revenue and $130,000 for the SAFER grant. We realize that this will place additional pressure on the budget, but we would not be fulfilling our charter responsibilities if we let this serious concern unaddressed. If the Select Board wishes, Finance Committee can work with the town administrator and superintendent on light item reductions options that will help produce a balanced budget. It is our considered opinion that the current budget is not balanced as presented. We would appreciate this memo being read at the meeting along with other correspondence. Regards, Matthew Ofton, Chair, Grafton Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only one?
That is the only one.
Okay. Do we want to have any discussion on the correspondence?
I'll mention that I know at a couple of meetings ago, and I think throughout some of the meetings, I had expressed some of my reservations on utilizing those numbers. I just don't know how the rest of the board felt about it at the time. It may be my fault for not maybe pushing the board to see whether or not we needed to absolutely direct the town administrator to potentially look at those reductions, and then how would that impact the budget overall. I don't know how the board feels about it. I know I brought it up in the past, but maybe at the next meeting when there's 5 of us present, maybe we can put this on the agenda. I believe Tim will be back from his trip, and I think that we should have a good, long, hard discussion about that and really kind of weigh out the pros and cons and then come up with a determination going forward based on what was asked in this correspondence. But I think more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but subsequently when I mentioned this, several weeks ago, and I think it was mentioned last week as well. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on the correspondence. I think it was a very well written letter, and personally, I feel that it's warranted. It's warranted that we have a serious discussion about those projections.
I want to second that and also thank the Finance Committee for the work that they do. It's not easy to be presented with the voluminous tome that is the town budget and to go through it as a volunteer and then to have the wherewithal to make recommendations that differ from the recommendations of someone who does this professionally. But I do agree with the Finance Committee that I would rather not rely on the SAFER grant, which we haven't applied for, and we don't know, number one, we don't know if we would get, and we don't know when that SAFER grant would come in. And number two, we've talked about projections for revenue from marijuana for a while, but that again it's an industry that's largely outside of our control. And as I like to remind people, if the Board of Selectmen could just snap their fingers and create new growth or commercial growth, we would. We'd have done it already, and this conversation would be over. We wouldn't have to have that conversation. But as far as recreational marijuana sales goes, a lot of that is outside of our control and is in the hands of the state and the Cannabis Control Commission for when they want to license these. And it's in the hands of private businessmen who have their own plans for their parcels and all the rest. On top of that, as far as host community agreements go, a lot of the income and the revenue that we receive from those sunsets after a few years. So you can't even really rely on those through the length of even a 5-year projection. So I think we should have a conversation about those 2 particular funding sources, what's appropriate to include in a budget, and where we would like to see that money go if and when it comes in.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Stock?
don't we have this appropriated, at least the fire chief, if we don't get the SAFER grant in next year's budget? Or no, we would not hire a fire chief if
No.
this does not go through. Okay,
Right.
so
My question too.
then
Yeah.
then this is, we'd be adding an additional $430,000 to our deficit. So it looks like it gets rolled into the override.
Right.
I mean, there's no other options because we have made the cuts that we need to do on the town side, and it was 598,000 or whatever you presented to us. And the school is saying they've done what they can and still have a gap. So I don't see any other solution other than to add this, which really puts an added burden on everyone. But
Well, thank you. Anything else?
no,
Okay.
I don't think there's any other action,
No.
to tell you the truth.
No, but that was my question. Really doing more with process. I don't know if you could answer, Becca, but so if we apply for the SAFER grant and we get the SAFER grant, if we don't have the revenue in the budget to be approved at town meeting, then we can't hire that position, right?
Right, so the position, the funding for the position in the budget, the town meeting gets to allocate that money. So town meeting is the body that gets to say, hey, you get to spend this $130,000 on a fire chief. That's what that process is. So if we took it out of the budget entirely, and we still proceeded with the grant process and we didn't receive the grant, then,
We don't have. the
then
money. Yeah.
likely what happens is we show up in October and we hope that there's room in new growth to raise and appropriate. And then we ask to town meeting to appropriate the position then, and then we start the hiring process in October, November. And then we have a fire chief on board in January 2021, which is tough. That's,
Yeah.
that's a year away, and we've already push this down the road too long, as I'm sure Ray can attest to. So, the alternative, which is the way that we're proposing it, is to have town meeting allocate the funding for the position. So have them say, yes, we want you to hire a fire chief, go through the process of the grant. I do have a little bit more detail on the grant timeline. I know that was something we didn't have when we met with Finance Committee, and we were able to get that information. So we believe that the grant is going to open up in early March. That's when they'll start taking applications. We'll be prepared to make application then. It's open for about 30 to 45 days, then it closes. Be a review of applications, and then 30 to 45 days after that, they make a grant announcement. So based on that timeline, and if everything goes well, we should be hiring a fire chief in early September. That's sort of the timeline that our consultant has given us. And that's great, town meeting approves it, allocates it, we get the grant, we hire the chief, boom, we're ready to go. We don't get the grant, come September, we don't hire anybody, and we end up going in October, just like we would if we didn't have, if we didn't allocate the money in May and trying to raise it, barring that we have new growth and we're able to do that. So really, the only thing that changes is timing. You lose probably like 5 or 6 months if you take it out of the budget entirely and wait. So that's, and Tim, she'll offer insight next week. I'm sure that's sort of just
Yeah, let's have a
putting
conversation.
it
Yeah,
all together.
yeah.
One other component I'll mention too. So let's say we go down that road. Let's say we don't get the grant, and we go to October town meeting, and we use some one-time revenue and new growth to.
It's not one-time revenue.
So you're gonna
New
take
growth is
$100.
not one-time.
You're gonna take $130,000 from new growth in October.
I'm not saying yes,
I'm
we
just-
are. It's a potential
It's an option.
option.
All right. So okay. So there's two parts
Yeah.
to this, right? So even if we get the grant, let's say we get the grant and everything, the stars and the moons align, we still have to find that money at some point in our operational budget because that grant's not going to last forever.
It's true, they're only like 3 to 5 years, right?
The estimate
3
is,
years.
Okay.
3 years.
3 years.
All right. So am I making the wrong assumption? Then if we don't get the grant and let's say we go in October and we look to raise and appropriate some additional money from, and we say we kind of, you said new growth. I know that's not definite, but we utilize some of that funding. That's money that we have to now figure out how to.
Well, so if we raise it in October, it will be part of the levy, right? Because the new growth, you're allowed to raise the difference between what you estimated and what your actual is. So that's new money that you're allowed to raise through the tax levy prior to setting the tax rate. So that money would then be in the levy, and theoretically, we would continue to carry that money for that position looking out. And it will always be in the levy because you've raised it in October and you have it available. Once it's in the levy, it never goes away.
Yeah.
So, does that answer your question?
It does.
In the 3-year thing, I understand that. And the way, right now, looking at our projections, we're carrying the grant money for 3 years, assuming we get it for 3 years. And in year 4, it goes away.
Right.
So we know that eventually we're going to have to fund the department through the tax levy. There's
So-
not any other way around that.
So this is sort of my point, though, is, if we're going to have to get to that point anyway, I want to have this context, this discussion in the context of the overlay, as Ray was saying.
Yeah.
We do need to discuss, not only the school side, but the municipal side operations, what we see going forward. And the grant money is sort of gravy for that. In my mind, we have to do this regardless. But I want to be able to show people, look, you can't count on grant money that you don't have, and we have to make hard decisions here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we've approached it is kind of like it's like a dual track. We're doing
Sure.
both at the same time. Without a doubt, on the 5th, the fire department is going to be part of the conversation. It will be included. And we'll probably offer a few different scenarios, if you want to do schools and fire, school and capital, school, municipal, fire, capital, we're going to try to give it to you all in pieces, and then you can sort of pick out, the pieces that you want to keep
Sure.
or you want to. That's your job.
Yeah,
the hard
that's
job.
fun sometimes.
But if we take it completely out of the budget, it's not part of the budget being voted on at town meeting. So if we
fire-
get the grant, the
Right.
fire, so then if we get the grant,
You're stuck. You have
We're
to
s-
wait.
we
You
have to wait.
well, realistically, you'd have to wait until October because that's when you get a second bite at the apple and ask taxpayers to allocate funding. But that does very much delay the timeline. Because we wouldn't, if we don't, if in May, town meeting doesn't allocate money and say, yes, you can hire a fire chief, we're not gonna start the process of
Right.
hiring a fire chief, right? We're gonna
Right.
wait until October.
Right.
And I'll also mention too, that this is just one out of the 3 full-time positions. And to Ray's estimate, I mean, that's a kind of like we threw some spaghetti on the wall at the meeting and kind of came up with what we felt was that number, because we pulled some other departments and looked at their command structure and realized that, that was approximately what was estimated. That only handles a portion of that. So to put the full-time training safety officer in place, and to have, the other positions that are associated with that, I mean, once you have that core structure together, I mean, the amount of grants that the department could qualify for going forward grows exponentially. So I think that when we're talking about the SAFER grant, I think it's a great first step. And if we do happen to get it, believe me, I'm on board with that. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I know.
We should do that, right? The idea though is that there's still some needs in that department that go beyond.
Oh, yeah.
You're right.
Well, I mean, I think we're all on the same page. But I
Yeah,
hope.
I do too. And we sort of started and opened the conversation, but I think we're all on the same page that we are going to have it on the next agenda for
Yeah, and
more
I
discussion.
there are some updates on the marijuana front. I
Yep.
did have a meeting this week with one of the retailers, or possible retailer. He will be here. But so we'll have all that update for you guys next week when he's
Great.
back.
Yeah, if we have even like maybe a summary in the packet too,
Yeah, we can get you some
Yeah,
info
that'd be
ahead of
great,
time.
just so we
Yeah.
can think about it. And Justin, come on up.
It's Justin Wood, 5 Garden Street. So on the fire thing with the SAFER grant, just a logistic question. Where Tim had previously said we're not going to hire for the role if we don't get the grant. Do we have is it possible on the warrant articles for the town meeting to say, here's our balanced budget without the SAFER grant, without the staff, but then have a separate warrant article that says we're going to be doing this grant proposal. If we get the grant, then we can hire for this role in the warrant. Is that something that we have the ability to do?
I don't really know what the difference is. I guess.
I don't know how you technically do that.
Yeah.
That's what I wasn't
Yeah,
sure. As five.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand. I'm saying it's like,
and we do that a lot, right? We kind of take pieces out and we throw them in warrant articles.
Right.
And so I'm just not. I don't really know how is that different from putting it in the budget. I'm not sure because it's the same ask at the end of the day. But it's a good question.
Sure, come on up, Ray.
Excuse me. The $480,000 that we came up with, that includes benefits. So that's not just salaries. We're not gonna pay these guys, $1 million to come in and run a fire department. But if you just hire a fire chief, that fire chief is going to be by himself. Yeah, I'm dying.
yep.
But right now, the
That's good constituent service right there.
it is. I'll vote for you next time.
Wait a minute. Wait. What next time? No, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Ray.
No, anyway. So just to give you an idea, so right now we have 2 chiefs in town. So Jimmy Barker just retired, going to his retirement party on Friday night. Now, there is no North End chief, there is no South End chief. The district chief in the center is going to be leaving in May or June. You're down down to 1 from 4. From 4 down to 1. So when we came up with this number of $480,000, and I know this is not on the agenda, and I'm amazed that I'm getting to talk this long about it.
It's under correspondence, Ray. Go ahead.
But we came up with that based on the chief at $140,000, an inspector / safety officer at 85, and then a training officer fire prevention for 85. Those 3 people, if we hired them today, have an enormous job to do. Enormous. One person can't do it. You do need the 3 people. I understand the grants. I know that Westboro got a grant for 9 firefighters about 6 months ago, and that's great. all those grants require an enormous amount of records and documentation. That's an issue.
It's a huge issue.
That's an issue. So, you know, I can't say enough about this. I'm very passionate about this. I wanted to be on this committee. I wanted this to go through. I don't want to see anybody lose their job, or anything like that. But I do want to see the fire department progress and be safe and take care of the residents. That's really what I want. So, however you guys work it out, the $130,000 SAFER grant, I can tell you right now, I'd put $1,000 on it. We're not going to get it. The information's not there to justify it yet. So, however it works, we really want to see, and it may not be $480,000 with the benefits, but it may be 420 or whatever it is. But I'd really like to see that. I'm done talking for the night. I'm going to finish this water. Then I'm going to think about voting for him again.
Preface think.
Preface again.
I'm the same term, just putting that out there. Thank you, Ray. So I will say, just to end this discussion, unless anyone else has anything, you know, we sort of I asked the question of process, and I think we all indicated that we need to have this on a future agenda. I will say also, you know, thank you to FinCom, and it's their job to be conservative with the budget. So, you know, I think that this warrants a deeper discussion. They have their reasoning for bringing this forward. We have to determine whether we agree that process is right or not, and that's why there's more than one committee. So, you know, I think we're all in agreement that this should be on a future agenda for more discussion, and we can take it from there. So, thank you. All right, so moving on to Select Board Handbook under discussion, and that's something that Donna had brought up before, so I'm going to hand it over to you for a continued discussion. Thank you for putting it back on the agenda.
So we've talked about this, I think, at one or two previous meetings, and I provided some samples, and so did Peter. And I was just gonna, frankly, from community to community, similar to Grafton, these handbooks don't vary very much in terms of what their content is. So I was going to offer to brand it as a Grafton one, and then bring it forward for the committee to discuss at a future meeting.
That's great.
Sure.
That's great.
Should that be something that's more of a workshop item, or something that we should have in advance and then edit as needed? I
Doesn't
mean,
matter,
what?
whichever way was preferred.
It sounds like a workshop thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go
Me
through,
too.
go through the particular chapters, the topics of discussion, do some wordsmithing,
Yeah.
put it together.
So just let us know about timeline, and I think, you know, just moving forward with this sooner than later. I mean, we're in the midst of a whole bunch of other discussions, but those won't ever seem to go away.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that up. Any other discussion on that?
Nope.
No? Good. Okay. All right, we're down to meeting minutes.
We don't
So
have any minutes tonight.
we don't have any meeting minutes.
Motion to
tonight.
adjourn.
Second.
Motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank
Thank
you, everybody.
Have a good night.